I am 80 years old, and it took me 68 years to understand what my mother could not say to my face. 3 weeks ago, I was sorting through a cedar chest that had sat in my back room since my mother passed. I had opened it before, many times. I thought I knew everything inside it. But this time, beneath a folded apron I had pressed to the bottom without looking, there was a piece of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was young, unsteady. I did not recognize it at first, because I had only ever known my mother's old hand, the one that had grown certain and slow with age. This was the hand of a girl. 3 sentences, unfinished. The ink had gone brown. I stood there in my back room for what I believe was 23 minutes. I did not move, because I understood. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that what I had believed for 68 years was not the truth. I had believed I was the only one who wept that night, the only one who lay still in the dark and told herself something must be wrong with her. I was not the only one. I was simply the last to know. I did not tell my children what I found. I did not tell my sister. I sat down and I began walking back through every moment I had dismissed, every quiet thing I had been too young or too yielded or too afraid to read. And what I found there, I am going to tell you now. If you have found your way here tonight, I am glad you came. If this is your first time with me, I would be grateful if you would subscribe. And if something in what I have said already has touched something quiet in you, press the like button. It tells me you are here. Tonight's comment question is this: where are you listening from? I read every single one. Knowing you are there in your own quiet room matters more than I can say. Now, let me walk back to the morning it began. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 80 years old and I have lived my whole life inside the Plain community. The same hollow in Ohio where I was born, where I married, where I buried my parents and 2 of my children, where I expect to be buried myself, beneath the simple stone that will say only my name and my years. I have not spoken about what I am going to say tonight to anyone living, not because I was forbidden, not any more, but because I did not yet have words that fit. I believe I finally do. I want to walk back through what I missed. There were signs. There were always signs. I simply did not know then how to read the hands of women. The morning of my wedding, I was 13 years old. My mother ironed my dress herself. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her. The iron moved back and forth in a slow, even rhythm, slower than it needed to. The fabric was already smooth. She kept moving anyway. The sound of it filled the room, the hiss of steam, the smell of hot cotton. She did not sing, which was unusual for her. She did not pray aloud. She did not look up at me, not once, for what felt like a very long time. I thought she was tired. I thought she was concentrating on doing the work well, the way she always did everything, carefully, without waste. I did not think about it again for many years. I did not yet understand what a woman looks like when she is holding something back. At the wedding meal, my eldest aunt leaned close to me. She was a small woman, careful with her words, careful with everything. She had been married 40 years by then. She smelled of rosewater and wood smoke. She put her mouth near my ear and she said, quietly, so that only I could hear, "You will learn what to fold away." I smiled. I thought she meant laundry. I thought she meant the management of a household, the practical knowledge that comes with time. The long table was full of food. There was roasted chicken, baked bread, the voices of people I had known my whole life. I tucked her words somewhere small and did not bring them out again. Not for 31 years. Not until my own daughter married, and I found the same phrase rising in my throat before I could stop it. I swallowed it back down. I did not know why. I would spend years trying to understand why. I want to pause here for just a moment. If you are walking through this investigation alongside me tonight, I am glad for your company. There is a link in the description below. It will take you to the rest of this series, where I have been piecing together other things I carried for a long time without understanding their weight. I add to it when I am ready. Come when you are ready too. Now. The cedar chest. My mother spent 3 days packing the cedar chest that would go with me into my marriage. 3 full days. I watched when I was allowed to and tried not to hover. She folded linens with great care, a spare prayer cap, 2 aprons, a mending kit with thread in 4 colours, beeswax, a small bar of plain soap. The chest filled slowly, deliberately. What I noticed, though I pushed the noticing away quickly, was what did not go in. I had a small stone I had kept since I was 7, smooth and grey, found at the creek below our property. I had kept it in the same place for 6 years. It was not in the chest. My childhood drawings, folded inside the back of my Bible. Not there. A handkerchief of my mother's that I had slept with during illness. Not there. I told myself these things were childish, and I was not a child anymore. I told myself that for a long time, that I was not a child anymore, that those small things had no place in a married woman's cedar chest. My mother had taught me the Ordnung, not as rules, but as a way of being. Yielded, not suppressed. Yielded felt different from suppressed. Yielded felt holy. To carry your own grief quietly was not weakness, it was faithfulness. I believed that. I had been prepared for marriage the way you prepare a room. Cleared, swept, made ready for what will come next. No one asked what I had wanted to put inside that room myself, and I did not ask either. But there was one night, many years later, when I thought about that stone at the creek and could not remember when I had stopped thinking about it. It would be 31 years before I asked myself why I had not simply put it in my own pocket. At the ceremony, just before the vows, a neighbour woman came to me. She was long widowed by then, I do not know exactly how many years. She was not a woman who touched easily, but she took my face in both her hands and looked at me for a long, still moment. Her hands were dry, warm. She did not speak. She nodded once, slowly, and then she stepped back. I thought it was a blessing. I felt proud, chosen, seen, approved of. I carried that feeling into the afternoon. It was not until 47 years later, standing before my own granddaughter on the morning of her wedding, that I understood what that look had actually been. I felt it move through my own hands before I understood it in my mind. I stood before that young girl's face, and I did not know what to say. I drove home afterward and wept. I did not know why until I opened the cedar chest. I drove home from my granddaughter's wedding with something I could not name pressing behind my eyes. I went to the back room. I opened the chest, not knowing what I was looking for, only that something had been left unread, and I had been patient with that unread thing long enough. That is when I found the folded paper at the bottom. That is when I found my mother's young hand gone brown with age. I sat down on the floor of that back room with the letter on my lap, and I began, for the first time in 68 years, to put the pieces where they actually belonged. I had 4 of them. I thought that was all there was. I was wrong. There was one more, and it was the one that broke everything open. I sat on that floor for a long time, the letter in my lap, the cedar smell rising around me, and I let myself do what I had not permitted in 68 years. I laid the moments out side by side and looked at them plainly. The iron moving too slowly, the phrase about folding things away, the stone that was not in the chest, the widowed woman's hands on my face. I had stored each of these in a separate room inside myself. I had never put them in the same room. Now I did. And what I saw was not 4 separate memories. It was one gesture, repeated 4 times, by 4 different women, each of them trying to reach me through the only opening they had. Not words, never words, but the particular weight of what they did with their hands, and what they chose not to say. I thought then of the other women who had married young in our community. Not the young brides, the older women who came the morning of each wedding to help. They were always there, my mother's generation, my aunt's generation, gathered in the kitchen before the ceremony. I had thought it was custom. I had thought it was practical. But now I remembered. They were never idle. They were always working, kneading bread that was not needed, ironing things already smooth, sweeping floors already clean. Their hands never stopped. And the room was always quiet in a particular way. Not peaceful, not celebratory, occupied, as though the sound of steady work was the only thing keeping something else from filling the air. They were not there to prepare the house. They were there to fill it with the sound of women who had survived, who were still standing, who wanted the young bride to hear it, even if she could not yet understand what she was hearing. I am going to pause here, because what comes next, I want you to be ready for it. If you are not yet subscribed, I ask you to do that now. And if you have a sister, or a daughter, or a friend who has ever carried something she could not name, I want you to think of her tonight. The comment I want to leave you with before we go further: what did the women in your life fold away and never speak of? You can say it here, in this quiet. I will read it. And there is more I have not yet said. I will be back with another piece of this soon. But now, the letter. I unfolded it slowly. The paper had gone soft at the creases, the kind of soft that comes from years, not from handling. I do not think my mother had taken it out again after she put it away. The handwriting was not the handwriting I knew. I had known my mother's hand as steady, as certain, as a woman who had long since made peace with her life. This hand was neither of those things. It pressed too hard in some places. It lifted too soon in others. It was the hand of a young woman writing quickly before she lost her nerve. And I sat there and I asked myself, for the first time, the question I had spent 68 years refusing to form into words. Was it possible that my mother had wept that night too? Was it possible that she had lain in her own dark, at her own age, and believed the same thing I had believed? That something was wrong with her? That her fear was a spiritual failure? That she had been given a room she did not know how to live in? And then the letter told me. Not in full. The letter was unfinished. 3 sentences and a half, and then the ink stopped. But the 3 sentences were enough. She had written to someone unnamed. I will never know who. She had written, I want to tell you what I could not say to her face. And then a space. And then, I knew. I knew when I ironed the dress. And then the sentence that did not finish. I read it 3 times. Once for what I had missed. Once for what I had refused to see. Once for what I now could not unsee. My mother had stood at that ironing board on the morning of my wedding, and she had known. She had moved the iron slowly because she did not want to finish. Because finishing meant handing me to a life she recognized. A life she herself had entered at an age not so different from mine. She had not been quiet because she was tired. She had been quiet because she was holding something she had carried for decades and had never once set down. And she did not know how to keep holding it and speak at the same time. The aunt's phrase was not about laundry. It never had been. The stone was removed from the chest because my mother could not bear to watch me carry a piece of my childhood into a room she knew would change me. The neighbours' hands on my face were not a blessing. They were a recognition. I know this room. I am sorry you were about to enter it. I survived it. I believe you will too. Every woman in that kitchen on my wedding morning had been in that room. Every one of them had wept in the same dark. Every one of them had told herself something must be wrong with her, and not one of them had ever said so aloud. The silence was not mine. The silence was the inheritance. It had been passed from pair of hands to pair of hands for longer than any of us could trace, folded into ironing, kneaded into bread, pressed wordlessly through the palms of women who loved us and could not find the door in what they had been taught to call yielding. I had not failed God that night. I had been handed a locked room and told not to notice the door. And every woman who loved me had stood outside it, knowing, holding the same key they had never been permitted to use. For 68 years, I performed the expected shape of my life. Grateful wife, faithful woman, yielded servant of the community and the Lord. And I was those things. I do not say otherwise. But I was also a girl of 13 who kept a smooth grey stone at the creek and did not understand why it was taken from her. I was also a woman who lay still in the dark and decided her grief was a sin. I was also a daughter whose mother began a letter she never finished, because she too had been taught that to name the weight was chokhmah, was pride, was placing herself above what God had arranged for her. Both of these things were true of both of us. The mask was not the whole face. The private truth existed. It was real even when no one could see it, even when we ourselves tried not to look at it. I hold that letter now, the way my mother held that iron, both hands, slowly, not looking up, trying to do the work carefully, trying not to let it go before I am finished. I am 80 years old. I do not know how many years I have left to speak, so I am trying to use them plainly. If you were handed a silence that was dressed as holiness, if someone cleared away the parts of you that were still a child and called it growing up, if you lay in your own dark and decided the weight you felt was a flaw in your own soul rather than a door that had been locked from the outside, I want you to hear this. The weight was real. You did not imagine it. And the women who loved you and said nothing were not cruel. They were carrying the same room inside them. They simply had no words that were permitted. Neither did I. I have them now, and I am saying them. For my mother, who stopped mid-sentence. For my aunt, who chose the closest words she had. For the widowed neighbour, who put everything she knew into the palms of her hands and pressed it gently to a young girl's face and hoped, somehow, it would be enough. I have kept the unfinished letter. I will not finish it. I have thought about whether I should, and I have decided it was never meant to be finished. Some truths are not meant to be completed. They are meant to be carried forward, from one pair of hands to the next, growing a little lighter each time someone finally says them aloud in a room where they are permitted to land. I have said mine aloud now. That is what I had. That is what I came here to give. Understanding does not always arrive in time to change things. Sometimes it arrives just in time to set them down. If something here has touched a quiet place in you tonight, if you recognize this silence, or someone you loved who carried it, will you leave a word in the comments? You do not have to say much, just that you were here, just that you heard. I read every one. And if you want to stay, if you want to keep walking through these things with me, subscribe and come back. There is so much more I have not yet said.